This is my smart home dashboard I created in a previous video. And this is what my girlfriend had to say about it recently. Get rid of this thing and replace it with something useful. And truth be told, I'm thinking the same thing. Because we don't really use it anymore, since we got so used to the Home Assistant app. That is why this useless screen became an eyesore over time. And it really got me thinking what to replace it with. And then it hit me. We got a calendar on our fridge that was really useful. The 3 times we used it, because we're too lazy to update it with new events. Instead, we nowadays use a shared online calendar. And I think it would be really handy to see these dates and events on this useless screen here. So in this video, let's combine a big e-ink display with lots of code and some exquisite 3D printing to possibly create my best home upgrade so far, that my girlfriend will hopefully approve of. Let's get started! This video is sponsored by Bamboo Lab and their new H2D 3D printer, which is perfect for this kind of projects, because the size of the required 3D printed parts are pretty big, but the H2D can handle that. Combine that with an enclosed heated chamber and an AMS that can dry your filaments, and you get some excellent print results. You will see the 3D printer later in action, and if you're interested in checking it out yourself, then click the link below in the video description. Now first off, something obvious. Yes, my Home Assistant does include a calendar section, which I actually already linked with my shared calendar. So why do I not simply display this? Well, I think such an LCD touchscreen Raspberry Pi combo is not only a total overkill for a calendar, but it also requires way too much power for that, with up to 10 watts. So instead, I would rather love to use something like this, an e-ink display. Such a display not only retains its screen information when not powered, but it also draws almost no current, only a little bit when it refreshes. But of course, this little thing here is not sufficient for my dashboard replacement, because I want around the same size of 13.3 inches. Since I have to cover up the big hole I made in the wall for the power supply, as well as the wall anchors. So I did a bit of digging around online, and it was actually quite hard to find an e-ink display with that size. However, eventually I found one, which I got in combination with the ESP32 demo kit for, at the time, $180. And after a week of waiting, it arrived at my place. And I gotta say, not only the e-ink display looked promising, but also the given ESP32 dev board for it. On the manufacturer's website, we can also find lots of datasheets, schematics, and even an example code that I immediately uploaded to my board. After then hooking up the e-ink display to it and giving it all power, everything seems to work perfectly fine. And I would say the display quality is definitely good enough for a calendar. And for that, I will be using Google Calendar, since you can not only easily share yours with your significant other, but you can also grab your calendar events data more or less easily through the free API. And at this point, we could go in 2 directions with the project. The first one would involve letting the ESP32 do pretty much everything, meaning grabbing all the calendar data, sorting it, and displaying everything in a pleasant way, which is quite a lot for the ESP32 to handle. Thankfully, I didn't go with that route, because I wanted Home Assistant in between, so that I can manage my calendar there as well, and maybe later create some automations with it. So Home Assistant will grab all calendar data and send it via MQTT to the ESP32, which then sorts it and displays it. Doesn't sound too complicated, right? Well, I spent 2 days on setting this up and coding, for which I have to admit I used AI for help, because otherwise it would have taken me a week or so. So what I did was firstly setting up the API service for my Google Calendar, so that I can grab its data. And for that, there exists a well-working guide on the Home Assistant website. This way, it was super easy to integrate Google Calendar into Home Assistant, which, as you can see, works perfectly fine. Afterwards, I opened the configuration.yaml file in order to create an e-ink calendar sensor that basically grabs all the events in my calendar. To find out if that worked, I simply searched for it and checked its attributes. And yes, everything was there. Then I created an automation that takes the sensor data, converts it into a JSON format, and publishes it via MQTT in this topic. And that was basically the Home Assistant side. Now on the ESP side, I firstly decided against the manufacturer's library and instead went with a community written one, because that one is more popular. With it, I firstly tried out the Hello World example, which worked just fine. Then I implemented the elegant OTA library. And I did that because I recently realized that sitting next to a project to upload new code kind of sucks. Instead, this library creates kind of like a web server, meaning if I visit the ESP's IP address, I can upload new code over my Wi-Fi network, which is super handy. And then we of course also got the MQTT aspects, which was not that hard to do, and thus the ESP can now receive the JSON event data. The last and hardest part though was sorting all the events, assigning them to days, and displaying that on the screen, which after a day of work looked like this. Not really that great yet. Instead, I want the calendar to always start with today and tomorrow, and after that all remaining days up to a total of 7 days. That meant the ESP also had to grab the current time and date, do some more sorting, and make it all look nice on the screen, which I think I accomplished after a few more hours. However, this still only looks like a list, and not a proper calendar. So last but not least, I wanted to integrate time sorting, with early events on the upper side and later events on the lower side. So one more sorting algorithm, and just like that, I was finally happy with my calendar. Now for the electrical wiring, I simply cut up a USB-C cable to reveal its 2 power wires. After applying 5 volts to it and plugging it in, we can see that the whole system normally needs around 0.3 watt, which is fantastic. And the max current flow is just above 100 milliamps, meaning even my tiny 5 volt power supply here is kind of an overkill. But I didn't have a smaller one, and thus I simply wired it up to mains voltage along with a Shelly Mini, so that I can turn on and off this whole system without having to take its enclosure apart. But as always, keep in mind that working with mains voltage should only be done by professionals. But anyway, speaking of enclosures, next I had a look at the mechanical drawings of my display, in order to come up with some first prototype designs. And since I was using the Bamboo Lab H2D for printing, which comes with some crazy speeds, I got my prototype prints super fast and thus was quickly able to find their weak spots. So I improved the design and ultimately ended up with these 3 parts here. I exported them as 3MF files and then imported them into Bamboo Studio, where I sliced the parts and sent them over to the H2D printer through my network. Now for the final prints I used white PETG filament, which I simply put into the AMS and clicked start. I really did not fine adjust or configure anything, but everything worked out perfectly, even though my garage is pretty cold and humid. So thankfully the H2D not only comes with a heated enclosed chamber, but also a huge build plate, which I really pushed to its limits with my prints. And best of all, by using the built-in camera, I could always check on my prints. So after a total of around 6 hours, my enclosure parts were done and looking fantastic. That means it was time to lower the e-ink display into its indentation, close it up with the holder piece that I secured in place with screws, and reattach the ESP board, in order to finally notice that the USB cable does not fit here. But no worries, I simply soldered a wire to the 5V and ground pin here on this header, which works just as well. So to finish this all, I secured the ESP with some hot glue, did the new mains power supply wiring, secured the new wall mount with the existing anchors and screws, connected 5V power, and simply pushed the display onto the wall mount. And bada boom bada bang, my e-ink calendar was done and looking pretty good. And best of all, my girlfriend approves. So yeah, I'm super happy with the result here. And if you want to make something like this as well, then you can find everything in the video description. As always, I hope you enjoyed this show and learned something new. If so, consider supporting this show on Patreon. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Stay creative, and I will see you next time.